Before we begin Unit 19, here is the answer to the Unit 18 question. The best answer is choice D.
All of the statements are correct. Our prevailing economic system that is based on growth encourages the extraction of mineral resources. This practice is disrupting critical nutrient cycles and accelerating the loss of biodiversity by causing ecosystem failure. Unit 19, Stealing Old Sunshine.
A physicist defines energy as the ability to do work. Energy allows mechanical, physical, or electrical tasks to be performed.
Until only a few centuries ago, all work that was performed on this planet relied on what scientists refer to as current sunlight, or energy received directly and immediately from the sun.
The sun shined on the plants grew, animals ate the plants, the animals died, the decomposers returned the nutrients to the soil while any unused energy was radiated back to space as low-quality heat, and the process repeated.
This one-way energy flow is a perfect example of a sustainable process, continuously powered by direct sunlight.
Then came the discovery of fossil fuels, or as some scientists collectively call them, ancient sunlight.
Fossil fuels are basically solar radiation that reached the Earth millions of years ago and has since been transformed into potential energy. It's now trapped beneath the Earth's surface and stored in chemical bonds.
Although it had taken millions of years for this resource to develop, humans learned how to release its potential immediately and with little effort on their part.
The net energy, or ratio of output energy to input energy, was so incredibly large that this unearned or stolen energy allowed our society to develop at an unnatural rate and for our population to grow exponentially.
It's hard to believe that only a few hundred years ago, people realized they could steal this energy from the earth and unfortunately created a society that is now dependent on fossil fuels.
Imagine that instead of fossil fuels, humans decided to invest their time and efforts toward developing more efficient ways to use current sunlight.
Had that happened, we would have benefited from a 100-year head start on developing renewable energy, and we would have had a much better chance of achieving a sustainable population and society.
You should understand that it takes energy to make energy. What is gained is called net energy.
The greater the net energy, the more economically profitable the process will be.
As of today, the use of fossil fuels requires relatively little energy input to get a large, high-quality energy output.
Since alternative sources of energy do not currently have this return on investment, there are obviously less incentives to use them.
A subsidy is a source of funding provided by a government or other entity that can make a preferred process or product more competitive.
At present, without government subsidies, renewable energy cannot compete economically with non-renewable resources such as oil, coal, and natural gas.
Let's take a closer look at the major categories of fossil fuels. We'll also examine nuclear power as an energy option.
Keep in mind that the consensus in the legitimate scientific community is that in order to attain a sustainable society, we must undergo a responsible and efficient shift to non-renewable energy within the next half-century.
Petroleum or crude oil is a non-renewable energy resource that can be refined into many useful fuel forms and consumer products such as gasoline, aviation fuel, heating oil, diesel oil, solvents, greases, waxes, and asphalt.
OPEC stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Examples of OPEC include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Libya.
These countries own most of the world's oil reserves, and the United States has been making efforts to reduce its dependence on OPEC oil.
Over the past several years, this was being accomplished by increasing extraction efforts even in environmentally sensitive areas.
Fortunately, the United States has recently shifted its efforts to developing renewable energy sources as a more sustainable way to meet the future power demands of our country.
There is certainly much debate as to when oil reserves will actually run out, or more importantly, become economically depleted, as there are both proven, already discovered, and unproven, probably or possibly will be discovered, reserves.
However, depending on the current rate of consumption, new discovery technologies, and transition to alternative energy sources, it's not unreasonable to estimate that we will have depleted both proven and unproven reserves by the end of the century.
Some of you will see the day when oil does run out.
As mentioned, our country has recently refocused its efforts on renewable energy resources, and this provides hope for our children and grandchildren, who will be the ones that will face the critical point when fossil fuels are no longer an option.
If teachers are able to infuse environmental education into the existing curriculum, their students will be better prepared for the inevitable transition to renewable energy and hopefully see the day when mistakes that began several hundred years ago can be reversed.
Natural gas is another example of a fossil fuel. It's found in underground pockets, usually above the crude oil reserves.
Using pressure, natural gas can be liquefied into LNG, or liquefied natural gas. That makes it much more convenient for transportation.
The good news is that there's a lot of natural gas. It has a high net energy yield and emits less pollution than other fossil fuels.
The bad news is that it still releases pollutants, is difficult to transport, and once it's converted into LNG, its energy yield is diminished.
Fracking is the process of drilling down into the earth and pumping a high-pressure water, sand, and chemical mixture into the rock to release the gas or oil inside.
The process allows drillers to reach once inaccessible resources of oil and gas.
Fracking is one of the major reasons that the United States is currently exporting more oil than it imports.
However, fracking uses huge amounts of water that must be transported to site at significant environmental cost.
Opponents feel that the potentially harmful chemicals used in the process may escape and contaminate groundwater. They also maintain that this practice causes earth tremors.
For these and other reasons, fracking remains a controversial fossil fuel extraction strategy.
Coal is a solid fossil fuel that is abundant, has a high net energy yield, and is relatively inexpensive.
If this is true, why don't we just use coal to provide our future energy needs?
Like any other fossil fuel, coal will also eventually become depleted, so even if it's used in place of crude oil, without switching to renewable options, some future generation will still have to consider alternative energy sources.
However, the primary reason that coal falls short of being the solution to our immediate energy dilemma is that when it burns, it emits large amounts of carbon dioxide and other pollutants that contribute to a myriad of air, soil, and water problems.
The concept of clean coal is misleading. It's like saying healthy poison. Emissions can be cleaned, but at costs that render the process less profitable. As a result, polluters will often attempt to cut corners to meet emission standards.
Nuclear power plants break apart atoms using a process called nuclear fission. In a nuclear reaction, incredible amounts of energy are released.
If well built, monitored, and maintained, nuclear energy facilities can be quite safe and capable of providing abundant and reliable electricity.
Unfortunately, there are 3 unavoidable problems associated with nuclear power.
First, nuclear power requires a lot of input energy, so the net energy produced is considerably lower than that of most other fuels.
Second, accidents do happen, and nuclear power involves highly radioactive materials.
The third problem with nuclear energy is that the waste product is highly radioactive and remains so for extremely long periods of time.
Since radioactive waste can remain hazardous for tens of thousands of years, there is a moral issue that must be addressed. What right do human beings have to benefit from the immediate energy produced by a process that will pose a hazard to future generations or future species?
Regardless of the disposal method, there is no way to ensure that accidents will not happen, containers will not fail, or even that humans will not become extinct and that their radioactive waste will not continue to cause environmental degradation and harm to other species well into the future.
In a way, our society exhibits many of the characteristics associated with an individual suffering from substance abuse.
A person with an addiction to narcotics is totally dependent on these substances and often fails to demonstrate rational thought or behavior.
Professional intervention and a willingness to endure the symptoms of withdrawal increase an addict's chances of regaining their independence and a healthy lifestyle.
Our society is addicted to fossil fuels.
We are certainly aware that these fuels are non-renewable, and by using them, we willingly degrade our environment.
This disregard for our own planet and the well-being of future generations constitutes irrational thought and behavior.
Like the addict, we need to rely on the professional expertise and assistance of scientists and responsible community planners in order to transition to a society that is independent of fossil fuels.
Many sacrifices will need to be endured if our society is to overcome its dependence on fossil fuels. However, we all know what happens to those who are not able to overcome their addictions.
Let's hope that we do not suffer a similar fate. Here is your question for Unit 19.
The consensus in the legitimate scientific community is that the attainment of a sustainable society will depend on
Choice A, an immediate switch from non-renewable to renewable energy.
Choice B, a responsible and efficient shift from non-renewable to renewable energy within the next half-century.
Choice C, the safe use of nuclear power and proper disposal of associated waste.
Or Choice D, the continued use of fossil fuels as they provide the greatest net energy of all currently available energy options.
The answer and explanation are provided at the beginning of Unit 20.